If you asked a medieval man whether women ever stood on a battlefield, shield in hand, he would probably laugh. Yet the truth hiding beneath the noise of chroniclers and old songs is far stranger. Women did fight. Some fought in secret, hidden behind armor that was never meant for them. Others were trained from childhood, raised in cultures where strength mattered more than gender. And many slipped into war not as legends, but as daughters, mothers, or widows who had no choice but to pick up a blade when the world demanded it. Their stories survive only in fragments, whispered in margins, wrapped in rumor, or buried beneath the glory given to men. But when you collect those fragments and fit them together, a different picture appears. One the medieval world tried quietly to forget. Across northern Europe, the idea of a woman with a sword was not entirely strange. In the sagas of the Norse, shield maidens walked beside their brothers, riding long ships across seas and charging into battle with axes raised. Even though the sagas blur myth and memory, archaeology tells its own story. Graves unearthed in Sweden and Denmark reveal women buried with weapons, armor, and horses, not as decoration but as their true identity. The people burying them believe these women knew war, and when you imagine a Viking raid, the crack of shields and the roar of battle, it's not hard to picture a woman among them, hair-braided, eyes set on the same fire that lit the hearts of her brothers. The sagas remember them because someone once saw them, fought beside them, or feared them. Farther south, in the kingdoms of Europe, women's battles were quieter, but no less real. Castles were both home and prison, but they were also fortresses, and anyone inside had to defend them when their husbands rode out to war. Many noble women became commanders against their will. They learned to ration food, negotiate with enemies, and hold walls that shook under siege. Some even led assaults of their own. The chronicles of France speak of women climbing battlements with boiling oil, firing crossbows, or rallying terrified villagers. These actions were not celebrated. They were simply expected when no one else could do them. The world did not want female warriors, but it kept creating them anyway. There were others who fought not from duty, but from desire, women who refused the life chosen for them. Some cropped their hair, wrapped their chests, put on a man's tunic, and slipped into armies where no one thought to look closely. Most were never discovered, their names lost forever among the ranks of common soldiers. But a few stepped out of hiding by accident, usually when wounded, bleeding through armor that did not fit, revealing the secret beneath the mail. Chroniclers recorded these moments with shock or distrust, unsure whether to admire or condemn. To them, the world made sense in strict lines, and such courage blurred everything. In the East, the story grew even more complicated. In the vast expanse of the Eurasian steppes, where horses lived almost as members of the family, women learned to ride before they learned to walk. Bows were as natural as breath. To survive there, everyone fought, and so, among peoples like the Mongols, women rode into battle beside their men, loosing arrows from horseback with deadly accuracy. Some became commanders in their own right, shaping armies that swept across continents. Foreign visitors often wrote with awe, describing steppe women as fierce, proud, and unafraid, living lives that European women could scarcely imagine. And then there were the women whose weapons were hidden beneath silence. Peasant women who picked up farming tools when raiders came. Townswomen who carried stones to city walls during sieges. Widows who hunted down the killers of their husbands. They were not remembered because they did not fit the tales told by kings, monks, or nobles. But in the moment when their homes were threatened, they fought with a desperation that left deep marks on those who faced them. A woman swinging an axe to defend her children is something no invader forgets. The strangest stories come from the shadows. The half-real, half-imagined accounts of women who became symbols. In some regions of Eastern Europe, villagers told of wolf women, fierce fighters who guarded forests and harassed enemy armies. Whether real or folklore, these tales show how people imagined courage when life pressed them to the edge. They wanted to believe that somewhere in the darkness, there were women wild enough to defend them. Occasionally, a woman stepped fully into the light and refused to hide what she was. Joan of Arc is the most famous example. A teenage girl who convinced generals and bishops that she was chosen for war. But even she was not seen as a warrior woman by her own people. They tried to fit her into religion, miracle, prophecy, anything except the simple truth that she had a soldier's mind. Yet for every Joan, there were dozens of unnamed women whose arrows, swords, and commands shaped battles that history quietly erased. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that medieval women had two lives. The one expected of them spinning, nursing, tending fires, and the secret one the world seldom acknowledged, where they learned the weight of steel, the terror of battle, and the strange calm that comes when survival leaves no room for fear. Even chroniclers who disliked the idea of women fighting sometimes admitted it when the truth forced its way through their ink. They wrote of women on ramparts, women on horseback, women rallying villagers, women dying with swords in hand. They tried to explain these moments away as madness or anomaly. But you can't explain away a pattern that appears across centuries and continents. Some women became legends, others became ghosts, but all were shaped by the same world, one that demanded silence from them, and then depended on their strength when everything collapsed. Their lives were woven into the fabric of medieval survival, not just in stories sung by poets, but in blood spilled on forgotten fields. And the more you search for them, the more you find faint footprints leading to battlefields where no one expected them. When you follow these women through the records of the medieval world, you start to see something that was never written down, but quietly understood. They lived between two expectations. The world wanted them to be still, obedient, tucked safely inside walls. But reality pulled them into places where survival didn't care about rules. That tension shaped every hidden story. Some leaned into it willingly. Others were dragged into it by circumstance. All of them left behind echoes that historians never intended to find. One of the clearest glimpses comes from the stories of women defending towns under siege. Medieval warfare was not always about grand armies meeting in open fields. It was often slow starvation, fire, and walls battered day after day. When food ran low and sickness crept in, even the strongest men faltered. That was when women stepped forward. Chronicles describe women carrying stones to the battlements, pouring boiling water on attackers, and shouting orders when male commanders froze. These accounts are never written with praise. They read almost like confessions, as if the writers were reluctant witnesses to courage they didn't know how to categorize. Some women didn't wait for war to come to them. A few sought it out. In the French countryside, a woman named Jeanne de Clisson turned from a noble widow into a pirate queen. After her husband was executed, she sold everything she owned, bought warships, and led a band of fighters across the English Channel, hunting anyone connected to the French crown. For 13 years she ruled the sea by fear alone. Chroniclers recorded her story because they were stunned, unsure whether to call her a murderer or a martyr. But whatever they believed, she proved that a woman wronged could become more terrifying than any army. In England, during the civil wars of the 12th and 13th centuries, noble women navigated a world where loyalty shifted like sand. When kings and barons fought over power, women like Matilda de Braos and Nicola de la Haye became the guardians of strategic castles. One defended her home so fiercely that even hardened knights feared her. The other held Lincoln Castle against repeated assaults, outlasting armies that expected her to surrender. These women were never meant to command troops, yet when war placed them in impossible positions, they did what leaders do. They fought. In Eastern Europe, tales of warrior widows surface again and again. When husbands died on the frontier or were taken by invaders, these women gathered whoever remained sons barely grown, neighbors, even strangers, and formed small militias. They fought bandits, repelled raiders, and guarded villages in the shadow of much larger wars. Their stories were often recorded in legal disputes or tax registers, not heroic literature. The scribes wrote them down simply because someone needed to explain why a woman held land, commanded a guard, or bore scars she refused to hide. There's another shade to this history that rarely gets told. Many women who fought did so in disguise because they loved someone. They followed husbands, brothers, or lovers to war, unwilling to be left behind. Some disguised themselves just to be near the people they cared about. But once battle began, there was no room for hesitation. They learned to fight because the world around them demanded it. And when they returned home, if they survived, they often slipped quietly back into anonymity, tucking their bravery into silence like a secret too dangerous to share. The church had a complicated relationship with these women. On the one hand, it praised female saints who resisted sin or defended their faith. On the other, it condemned women who crossed boundaries meant for men. When Joan of Arc rode into battle, priests struggled to explain her existence. They called her a miracle because they couldn't imagine a woman leading armies without divine assistance. They admired her and feared her, sometimes in the same breath. Her execution was not only a political act, but an attempt to pull her back into the roles they understood. But her memory proved impossible to contain. People whispered her story for centuries, not because she fit expectations, but because she shattered them. Outside Europe, the picture grows even more layered. In West Africa, oral traditions speak of queens who led armies into battle, some holding shields alongside their warriors, others standing at the front of marching formations. These stories survive through song and memory rather than parchment, making them harder to trace but no less powerful. They remind us that in some societies, women warriors were not anomalies, but respected leaders in times of crisis. Even in the Middle East, where medieval chroniclers focused mostly on political rulers and religious debates, hints of women in warfare appear between the lines. Some women defended caravan routes. Some organized the defense of cities under threat. A few even negotiated with invaders or took up arms when their homes were endangered. Their actions survived not because scribes admired them, but because those events were too significant to erase. And then there were the archers, perhaps the most underestimated of all. Many medieval cultures trained women in archery for hunting or protection. When towns were attacked, these skills became vital. Chronicles describe moments where attackers were shocked to find arrows flying from rooftops, windows, and garden walls fired by women who refused to surrender. These moments didn't become legends, but anyone who survived them remembered. What ties all these stories together isn't just the presence of women on the battlefield. It's the way the medieval world kept trying to hide them, even as it depended on them. Women carried the memory of war differently. Men boasted about campaigns and victories. Women whispered their experiences to daughters or hid them from everyone. Many lived with the weight of what they had done, unsure whether to feel pride or guilt. And because they rarely told their stories loudly, history nearly forgot them. Yet traces remain everywhere. A skeleton buried with a sword in a place no one expected. A chronicler's irritated note about women who fought like men. A song passed down in a village about a widow who saved her people. A castle record naming a woman as commander. None of these alone tell a full story, but together, they build a truth far bigger than any single warrior. When you step back, you see that the medieval world was never as rigid as people imagine. Women were not just passive figures waiting in towers. They were defenders, leaders, riders, archers, spies, rebels, and sometimes the most resolute fighters in the darkest hours of war. Their stories challenge the simple picture handed down through old books. They remind us that courage doesn't belong to one gender, one class, or one shape of life. In the end, the secret lives of medieval women warriors weren't secret because they were rare. They were secret because the world preferred silence. But the silence is cracking now. And as the truth returns, those women step back into the light, carrying the weapons they never should have had to. Lift but lifted anyway, because someone had to.